and it cries out for vigorous political resistance. Even though the bill was written and introduced by a far left member of the NDP, which should have been an alarm bell in itself, the Conservatives, including their Minister of Education, who I know is a highly intelligent young man, apparently gave it no scrutiny whatsoever before voting it forward. One of the most troubling aspects of Bill 67 is the deliberate use of weasel words that have the power to beguile even experienced political actors. I don't want to bring additional grief to Rick Nichols, who has suffered public embarrassment for his confusion of the word equity with equality, but that's a perfect example of how even people with a vested interest in ferreting out anti-democratic strategies on the left can be gaslighted into compliance by misleading words. The three big weasel words we see everywhere today are equity, diversity, and inclusion. All three mean the opposite, in fact, of what they imply. Today, I'm concentrating on the weasel word inclusivity, which is the one that's usually attached to gender issues. 10 years ago, we associated gender rights with gays and lesbians. Today, the word gender is almost invariably attached to trans rights. So inclusivity is a warm and fuzzy word, just like equity, which means erasure of equal rights for all, and diversity, which means erasure of diversity of opinion. Inclusivity means the compelled acceptance of gender theories that deny biological reality. It means that no matter what our eyes and common sense tell us, a man who identifies as a woman has literally become a woman and must be included in women's protected spaces like prisons, rape crisis centers, and sport. So sport has been my special area of concern for the last couple of years. I really believed that once the trans obsession hit sport, that was where the rubber would hit the road on gender theory absurdity, because that's one domain where fairness is a universally acknowledged and valued principle. No sport association or sport fan has ever argued for doping on any grounds, let alone human rights. And yet, today we're being told we must celebrate the genetic equivalent of doping by pretending a psychological illusion is the equivalent of a biological fact. Inclusivity of a biological male athlete who identifies as a woman invariably means the exclusion of a female participant somewhere down the line. And yet, almost everyone in a position of authority in the sport world is afraid to point out this naked emperor. They're terrified of being labeled transphobic. So they simply sign on to what I call gender mysticism to signal their progressive virtue. One male coach of a women's track and field team publicly explained the rise of a trans athlete's ranking of 400th in the male division to first in the women's division as the result of mental determination. Worse than the cowards who know they are abetting insanity but go along to get along are the true believers. The cowards will mumble the catechism when they're forced to, but they lack the passion to charge into battle on gender mysticism's behalf. The true believers are on their high horses, armored to the teeth with their mantras and imbued with evangelical passion to spread the good news. And a critical mass of these true believers are present in our educational system because they have been thoroughly indoctrinated in the gender dogmas. Bill 67 will ensure that any teacher who doesn't believe won't be accepted into practice. They look at children the way Putin looks at the Ukrainians. The children belong to us, these teachers think, even if they don't know it. And woe betide the parent who gets in our way. Yesterday, by Zoom, I attended the closing arguments in a case brought before the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario more than 2 years ago, and finally presided over by a judge over the course of the last few weeks. The case embodies the present dilemma in which many decent parents, just like the principals involved in this case, find themselves. So I think if I offer you the details of the case, I can show rather than simply tell why your party's education platform and why Florida-style age restrictions in any classroom discussion of sex and gender are so urgently needed. This case demonstrates that the obsession with communicating trans-friendly theories to children who are too young to understand what they are hearing is a threat to children's psychological health. Jason and Pamela Buffoni's daughter, Natasha, I'm not supposed to name her, but since this is a closed forum, I will. At the time, 6 years old, and by their account, a happy girl who loved school, was abruptly plunged into considerable distress when informed by her teacher that gender is fluid and untethered to biology. As an alarmed Natasha told her parents, who, by the way, would not otherwise have known, the teacher told the class that, quote, girls are not real and boys are not real. The allusions to gender fluidity as normal continued, and so did Natasha's distress, to the point of asking to see a doctor to confirm that she was a real girl. The Buffonis say in their claim that prior to the teacher's discussions with the grade 1 class, Natasha had not previously expressed anxiety around her complete confidence in her girlhood. The Buffonis met with the teacher and asked her to affirm Natasha's identity as a girl, that is, to reassure her that her identity as female was real in order to relieve her anxiety. Nothing that the Buffonis asserted was denied by the school or its officials, but their request was rebuffed out of hand, first by the teacher, who said that acceptance of gender fluidity reflected, quote, a change within society, then by the principal, and then all the way up the ladder to the superintendent of the school board and the curriculum superintendent. The Buffonis ultimately removed their daughter to another school where these gender theories are not taught, and where, her mother told me, she has recovered her confidence and buoyancy. In their Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario claim, the Buffonis request as a remedy that the tribunal order the school board to ensure that classroom instruction does, quote, not devalue, deny, or undermine in any way the female gender identity, and that parents be informed, quote, when lessons on gender identity will take place, including the teaching objectives and the materials that will be or have been used for such lessons. The response of the school board's lawyers, who asked for dismissal of the complaint, state the claim has no reasonable basis for success. The lawyers note that teachers' right to teach gender identity is endorsed by the Minister of Education, and that the, quote, age appropriateness of a classroom discussion does not engage a code-protected prohibited ground. So what they mean is, even if Natasha was adversely affected by the teacher's lessons, and they do not even deny that this is the case, she has no grounds for redress according to the Human Rights Code. If the school board is successful in its bid for dismissal, it means that the words gender identity and gender expression do not apply to everyone. They apply only to those whose gender identity does not synchronize with their biology. The protection of a biologically female child to identify as a girl is therefore not protected. Feelings of distress among the very small percentage of children whose gender identity differs from their biological sex must be alleviated at all cost. If that cost involves distress or confusion in the vast majority of other children like Natasha, that is not discrimination according to the code. The school board insisted that teaching gender theory was not part of the curriculum, but rather these were teaching moments where discussion came up spontaneously. This is a weasel tactic. The teacher had gotten materials from the library, a video and a book, that specifically transmitted gender theory to the children. Her excuse was that there was one child in the class who was showing signs of confusion about her gender, and the other children were teasing the child. So what she could have done is simply said, we don't tease children if they want to wear their hair short or if they want to wear something else. You have to be kind to everybody. And that would have been the end of it. But she was looking for a way to introduce these theories into the discussion. The Buffonis are not buying this teaching moment excuse while acknowledging that the Human Rights Tribunal may well choose to do so. The Ontario Human Rights Code takes a fairly broad view of discrimination. It states, for example, that a poisoned environment is a form of discrimination. The Buffonis are intending, or they have brought evidence that the manner in which the teacher was teaching the concept of gender identity resulted in a poisoned environment. A couple of years ago, when this all began, I wrote up the Buffonis' story in the Post-Millennial. Noteworthy is the fact that once transferred to a school that did not teach gender fluidity, their daughter expressed happiness to her parents that she no longer had a teacher who told her boys are not real and girls are not real. This really stuck with her. After my column was published, a reader wrote to me with her son's story, which bore similarities to the Buffonis in that her son also had never shown the slightest sign of gender confusion before lessons on gender theory began. After children were encouraged to identify along a spectrum, rather than asserting they were either girl or boy, he came home one day and announced he was pansexual and a demi-girl. Those parents took their son to see a psychologist who had not, fortunately, been captured by the gender mystics. When she was told the name of the school and teacher, the therapist exclaimed, "You are the seventh set of parents from that class, not the school, the class, who have come to me with this problem." The teacher's comments about boys and girls not being real arise from queer theory, which is the gender variant of critical race theory. Here, normativity is the equivalent of white privilege. Whether we speak of capitalism or race or gender or colonialism, the Marxist template remains the same. And that is what is taught at teacher training schools, and that's why Natasha's teacher is a true believer. The teacher probably studied at OISE. There, students who will emerge as the nation's elementary and high school teachers all study a famous text titled Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. Freire, born in 1921, began his career teaching underprivileged children in Brazil and then taught illiterate laborers how to read and write. His book, published in 1968, brought him international fame and a teaching contract at Harvard. Freire ended up as an icon of the pedagogical world with his book, The Linchpin of Teacher Training Programs Everywhere. Freire did not believe in what we consider actual teaching, since that is, in his view, an act of oppression. Teachers and students were to be absolute equals. Teachers he called revolutionary leaders, and they were not to be masters, but comrades. Freire was a great fan of Mao and his Cultural Revolution. In classical Marxism, ownership of private property is the root of all evil. The bourgeois property owners had the power, and the workers were exploited. Identity Marxism merely substitutes other forms of the oppressor-oppressed paradigm. According to Freire, what we understand as knowledge is just another form of oppressor privilege. The kinds of knowledge we value, science, reason, the ability to think critically, are, in their view, tools to maintain power for white people of European provenance. Other ways of knowing, like feelings, narratives, and lived experience, are equally or even more valuable. So we can call this literacy Marxism. Gender Marxism follows the same paradigm. So here the enemy is what they call cis heteronormativity. Gender Marxism posits heteronormativity as the equivalent of white supremacy, which is itself the equivalent of capitalist hegemony. The strategy is to encourage disgust with norms of sex and gender as a form of oppression, just as other forms of Marxist indoctrination encourage disgust for whiteness or the ownership class. The goal is to make that which is not normal the norm. And it is working. Universities ask students to locate themselves on the gender spectrum. At some universities in the US, up to 50% of students identify themselves as LGBTQ. This does not necessarily mean they are gay or bisexual. It can mean anything. Most of them say they are non-binary, which has no definition whatsoever, or questing or two-spirited. Nobody can tell you what these words mean, or at least nobody can articulate a meaning that makes sense. To declare yourself non-binary and compel usage of alternate pronouns doesn't require that you actually do anything or change your presentation. The point is, it is now cool to be queer and not cool to be normal. Who wants to be part of the oppressor class? Identifying as LGBTQ is the effortless gender equivalent of identifying as anti-racist. It's a status symbol. The other day, I read a post on Twitter that referenced the Florida bill, which proscribes sex and gender education before grade 4. In it, a self-pitying young male teacher said he found it, quote, scary that he could not tell his young pupils about a canoe trip he'd taken on the weekend because he was with his gay partner. But that's silly. He could say, last weekend, my friend and I went on a canoe trip. It was great. Why is the fun of the canoe trip diminished unless it includes information about his sexuality? This eagerness in progressive teachers to educate young children about sexual desire and its various expressions speaks to me of the inherent voyeurism of the gender mystics. By voyeurism, I mean adults who find titillation in the awakening of that part of a child's mind which is still innocent of knowledge about sexual desire. I'm not saying these teachers are potential pedophiles or that they consciously experience a sexual thrill in this awakening. Unconsciously, though, what they want to do is not a wholesome impulse. Just as children have the right to expect that their bodies will not be touched by someone other than their parents, parents have a right to expect that their children's minds will not be touched in inappropriate ways and filled with ideas presented at an age that should be presented at an age that is commensurate with the child's capacity for comprehension. Children experience a latency period during which their interests are asexual and for good reasons. Furthermore, during this latency period, they find it difficult to distinguish between reality and fantasy. Teachers pushing ideas these children are not ready for simply because they themselves are evangelicals for a belief system that has created an obsession with sex and gender in them personally is, in my estimation, a form of child abuse. As regards the Buffoni human rights case, I think it bears emphasis. I said it before, but I want to say again, the parents would not have known what their daughter was being taught if the child had not been so distressed that she repeated the teacher's words verbatim to her parents. One of the most disturbing elements in the trans activist movement is the pernicious idea that parents may be assumed to be hostile to their children's interests in matters of sex and gender, and that it is righteous, virtuous, to deny them knowledge about their children's education in that sphere. As the great conservative writer Thomas Sowell observed, ours may become the first civilization destroyed, not by the power of our enemies, but by the ignorance of our teachers and the dangerous nonsense they are teaching our children. Well, thank you for your attention. I'll end there. And I don't know, is there going to be Q&A or response time? Okay, thank you.
Hello. All right. Hey, Barbara.
Hi.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm not sure if you could hear, but you had quite a few people cheering in here as you were doing your speech.
I didn't hear. No, I didn't hear.
All right. Well, let's give her one big one right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So if there's anyone that have any questions for Barbara, you can come up to the microphone. Oh, right behind me. All right, we'll do questions for about 10 minutes. I'll let you go first.
The first case that you told us about, the little girl that was told boys are not real, girls are not real, was that in Ontario? I'm sorry, I know you said it, but
Oh, yes, it is in Ontario. I think I won't name the school, but yes, it's not far from Toronto.
Did they have to take her out of another board or just?
Yeah, they took her out of that board. I don't know what school they put her in. It may have been a parochial school, but you know, you don't have a lot of choice these days, do you? Unless it's parochial school, homeschooling, or, you know, some very
So Christian schools and Catholic schools are not exempt from having to follow this curriculum? Okay, thank you.
Oh, but I just wanted to say that I wanted to emphasize the fact that they call these teaching moments because the Education Act presently does not stipulate that the kids should be educated in grade 1 on gender identity. That's how they get around it. It's not on the curriculum. So they say, oh, well, the discussion came up because we had to have a discussion because one of the children was bullying another child. And it was about, you know, her having short hair and being, in fact, in this particular case, the child that was being kind of teased was in fact just a tomboy. She liked wearing short hair. She liked playing with the boys. And they were assuming it was gender confusion. I happened during the hearings when I was watching, I happened to see an email that the child's parents had written saying, she knows she's a girl. She's a tomboy. You don't have to worry about her. So the school was actually trying to get this child to be sort of a model of a confused child. It seemed to me, I'm you know, inferring that they were so eager to get a discussion going on a gender fluidity that they took as an example a child who was being teased, but who did not herself identify as anything other than a girl. So as long as they call it a teachable moment or a teachable moment, it's a spontaneous discussion, then they're really not following this has nothing to do with the curriculum. And that's what the lesson I took from listening in on the hearings, that told me something. How many of these teachable moments are going on that nobody ever knows about? Because if they look at the curriculum, they won't see it on the curriculum.
So a question I have with this is, is the identity of the teachers in these cases ever identified? Like, first of all, were they male teachers or were they female teachers?
Well, in this case, everybody seemed to me, the teacher was female, the principal was female. The principal happened to have a gender confused child herself, which, you know, she was very sensitive about it. But very interesting to me in the hearings was that they had brought in as one of their experts the curriculum superintendent who creates, you know, the gender, like who's in charge of the whole gender curriculum. And when the lawyer for the Buffonis questioned her about, she would ask her, oh, so you are the expert on this curriculum. Did you study child development? No. Did you study No. Did you are you a biologist? No, nothing. So how did she get to be an expert on nothing? There's nothing. She studied theories the same as everybody else. And then the lawyer said, tell me, how many genders are there? Oh, well, she didn't know. Well, if there's more than 2, how many do you think there might be? She wasn't sure about that. The whole point was that the lawyer was quite easily able to elicit the fact that this person is talking mantras, and that if anybody sort of questions and asks her to nail down precisely what is the definition of non-binary, she was like confused. She She knows, you know, she knows the mantras that she's supposed to say, but if you get her off track, or if you question them, and certainly no 6-year-old child's going to be questioning her on what she means by this, that, or the other. You know, so it seemed to me, I thought I was watching these hearings objectively. It seemed to me that the Buffoni side, there was a lot of critical thinking going on. And I don't know if the judge in the case will be listening intently. She seemed very nice, the judge. But I have a feeling that the judgment will go against them. And the reason I think that is because if they were to admit that this child had suffered a poisoned environment because she had had an adverse effect from, and that's in the Human Rights Code, it says, if a child's not child, if the person has been adversely affected on a protected ground. So if you're protected on the ground of sex, gender expression, all these different rights, some of which conflict, then even if it's only one person, and even if it's only one incident, then it's supposed to be called discrimination. But the lawyers on the other side argued, no, she cannot be discriminated against because she's not included in the grounds. Like, in other words, gender, all women, all men are included under sex-based rights, but not all women and men and girls and boys are included under gender expression rights. Only children who are not the norm, or whose gender expression is other than the norm, are protected. And she's arguing that's what the Human Rights Code intended with gender expression, and it's fair. I don't think it's fair. You probably don't think it's fair.
What's the solution here? I'm going to identify as a lesbian trapped in the male body.
Well, you could do that.
Does that work? That's a little weird, but I mean, it's really doing mental gymnastics. It's insane.
Of course, it's all. Listen, the whole thing is about gender Marxism or literacy Marxism. Is you can't win on logic. You can't win on reason. You're talking to people who, to ideologues for whom it doesn't enter in. It doesn't enter in to the discussion. And believe me, I've read the literature from sport associations who even admit that males have a physical advantage over women, but that inclusivity trumps fairness. And they'll say it, but they don't, and they'll say that, and that to them is an argument. That's not an argument, but they say it is.
Hello, my name is Sean Donahue, and I wanted to see if it would be all right if I just shared a very short story regarding something that didn't have to do with sex in the classroom, but had to do with the cultural Marxism that's being inculcated with our children. Would that be okay?
Okay with me.
So my son was in grade 7, and he attends a Catholic school. So this was a religion class, and he was asked to perform an assignment that the question was, can there be peace on earth in our time? Okay, and this was during the time when Portland was burning, and they set up that Chaz thing there, and there's cities and factories are burning, police cars and all that. Because we're very open in our family, we share everything, and we treat our children with this information like adults so that they can process it, at least on some level. It's not a surprise to them. So he's been exposed to this. And so he wrote an essay that essentially said, as long as BLM and Antifa are burning down cities in the United States of America, and the police won't stop this, and nobody will speak out against it, there cannot be peace on earth in our time. He was suspended for 20 days. Okay. Yeah, he was suspended for 20 days. I got a phone call from the principal, and he had called the police to see if a crime had been committed.
No, oh my God.
So this is absolutely true, okay? And so my father, who was a teacher for geez, 25, almost 30 years. I asked him for advice on this, and he went through the rounds, and it turned out we really didn't have any recourse, except because I didn't want my child to be excluded from the learning experience. And we don't have the resources to put him in some private institution. What we did was we had to kowtow to the principal and essentially say, we're very sorry that he said this. I was very upset.
Oh, I can imagine.
I have a tendency of saying what I mean, and that can get me in a lot of trouble a lot of times. And so I told him what I meant at the time. And I said, my son has nothing to apologize for. That didn't go over well. They had the superintendents involved and what have you. And so anyways, on the second meeting, when my wife, the cooler of the heads, ran the meeting with the principal, basically, once the apology was said and a promise of never expressing your opinion again, that is not accepted by the teacher, then he would be allowed to go back to class immediately, and we could look past this. On the day that my child went back to school, on his first day, the superintendent was actually there in the office and confronted my son, and he said, "We're not going to have any more problems with this, are we?" And of course, my son answered in the affirmative. And so, yeah, I wish I had actually experienced what you were saying now. And I wish there was somebody who could advocate on my side for my son. I mean, the principal called the police. It's just, that's insane. That's how crazy this
That is insane. To call the police, Yes. I honestly, that, wow, I hear stories, but that shocks me. That does shock me.
So anyways, I just wanted to see, I wanted to make you aware. And also when that nice lady had mentioned, is this stuff going on in the Catholic school? Abso-freaking-lutely it is. And it's not going to go away unless we fundamentally change this education system. I'm sorry for taking up your time. I just wanted to share that.
Not my time. I've got all the time in the world. Thank you for sharing that. That's a shocking story. And it certainly says a lot. Wow.
All right, Barbara, we've got 2 more questions for you.
Hello, my name's Gregory Tomchishin. I was just wondering, I guess I have a little bit of just a quick little story, but also I have a question pertaining to this as well. Back when I was in grade 12 in my high school, apparently unknown to me, my parents, they invited a group called the Get Real Movement, which was a LGBT lobbyist activist group of some kind. And no one had any foresight or anything at all. And they came in and taught like assembly. So literally the entire high school through grade 9 to 12 on 2 separate days, the gender ideology, like gunk or nonsense. So in this sort of thing, it's just like, what can we do? Or I guess in a way to advocate to let parents know, like, to demand from the schools, like what's going on, who's being invited in the schools and whatnot, and like what maybe they can even do at like maybe the board level or something like that. So I'm just curious, what can we do to get these groups kicked out of the schools or something else like that, or just please make parents aware that the schools are actively inviting these very toxic groups and returning again and again and again.
Yes, thank you for that question, and thank you for that experience, sharing that experience. One of the things I know that it's not enough to just sit here and tell you how terrible things are, and I mean, we need to have strategies. One bright spot in that, well, first of all, I think that most 95% of parents are not even aware this is happening because they don't tell you. They don't tell you about the third parties coming to the schools and indoctrinating the kids. But maybe I should hear the last question and deal with that. I was going to make some suggestions, but before, I think maybe I should hear the last question and I'll come back to some suggestions I have.
Thank you very much, Barbara. My name's Rick Nichols.
Hi, Rick. Poor you. I'm so sorry.
No. No, it's okay. I'm a guy. It's okay. Oh, my goodness sakes. You know what? Out of bad comes good. And this is tremendous. But here's my question to you, and obviously to our leadership team as well. because every one of our candidates in here are going to be faced with that, in their own riding. And what's the best way to, and I'm going to use the word dumb it down, and that's not an insult to anyone, but so that people can say, oh, I had no idea. I didn't know what that was. Because I'll tell you, when I read that bill, I had no idea at the
That's right.
time, really what it was. And I'm grateful for individuals that are in this room that I worked with to say, listen, we've got to bring this back to where it needs to be. So I'm hoping that there could be some, I'll use the word because I use it up at Queen's Park a lot, talking points to, for every one of us. So it's called Keep It Simple. And we can just go right in there because we will get those questions, I'm sure, on debate. And we need to be armed, in order to defend the faith, as I call it, to defend what is right versus what is trying to be forced upon our children which is really actually wrong. So any thoughts on that at all, Barbara? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rick. I have been thinking a lot about what I would do.
All right.
Oh, are we on?
Yeah, that's weird.
Should I continue? No?
Yes, you can continue, Barbara. I don't know. That's
Grassroots.
I don't know where that voice came from.
Oh, okay. Anyways, I do think about this a lot, and I think about what politicians can do, and I know that it has to be simple. And I think that it also has to be positive. And, it seems to me that the Ontario Party, you have a very good education platform. I like your education platform. And you could be positioning yourself as the parents' party. I think you need a lot of positive messaging around parents' rights, children's rights, and also this idea of words, knowing what words mean. Those three words, equity, diversity, and inclusivity, are not what they seem. They're the opposite. I mean, if I would have a giant poster, equity means with the equal sign, like, with a slash through it. And every one of those words, inclusivity means exclusivity, or some people are more equal than I don't know what I'm not in the advertising business, but I know that people who are, they know how to simplify a message. And I think that's one thing that really is worth investing time and effort in, and some money too, if is people that know how to communicate simple messages effectively. And I would say, I would make yourself into the Children's Rights Party, the Parents' Rights Party, and the Women's Rights Party. And the only reason I'm not saying men's rights is because it just so happens that women suffer in this under these weasel words more than men do, because women's spaces are being erased. Women can no longer feel safe in prisons. They are putting male serial rapists into women's prisons because they say they identify as women. They are, trans athletes. I'm sure you've seen the Leah Thomas case, this swimmer who was 456th ranking against men, who's breaking all the women's records, and everybody's celebrating her. Sports Illustrated doing a puff piece on him. So you can't get into sports. That's not your thing, and that's not that's not a provincial issue so much. That's everywhere. But education, I would make that your, I don't know, that should be your primary focus. It's the most important thing that's happening, is the indoctrination of children, the grooming of children. And I would just drum on that one thing. Do you have, hello, how do you do? Do you have children in school, ma'am? Do you know what they're being taught about, how old are they? Have you asked to see any of the teaching materials around, sex and gender? Do you, I mean, you can't be that direct, but you've got to find the messaging for that. I would suggest looking at a group called fairforall.org. Has anybody heard of fairforall.org? Fair for All is a chapter of a group in the United States that was started to combat Marxism in education. And they have a chapter in Ontario. And I would get in touch with their people and see if you can set up a meeting. And they already know a lot about the messaging, and they help parents get organized into chapters and into groups. If you can align with them, that would be amazing. There is a group, there's a website called lighthouseforum.ca, which was established to build a collaboration and work for Canadians who are concerned about the use and enforcement of illiberal practices to address current social issues. That's another educational site that could lead to maybe fruitful networking. That's something that I would do. I would have as one of your guest speakers the next time you meet. I think this could be very powerful. I think you should have an expert who is like a top psychologist who's in this field to explain what the latency period in children is. This is a well-known fact about children that from the age of, I think it's 4 to 7 or older, it's called latency. Children don't want to know about sex at that age, and there's a good reason for it, and they'll explain why. And that person could help you to understand what the latency period is, and I would make that a big talking point, because when you get into a child's mind and you insist that they start thinking about stuff they have no idea about, then you're actually, it's like touching them inappropriately. It's like they're not meant to grow. It's like making them grow crooked. There's a line of development in children. Everybody knows that, who actually cares about children and not about ideology. And I think you have to be educated yourself, so that you're able to take that Education Act or Bill 67 apart. So, and explain to people why it doesn't mean what it seems to mean. This whole idea of teachable moments and off curriculum, that's something that you should know about. The Human Rights Code says that it's about the dignity and worth of every person, regardless of sex. I would familiarize myself with the Human Rights Code and with this particular case, because it is an Ontario case. In fact, I'm sure that some of you probably know the lawyer who for the Buffonis is Lisa Bildy. Is that a name that's familiar to some of you? She was the law bencher who almost single-handedly stopped the practice of the Bar Association insisting that every lawyer have to sign an equity, diversity, and inclusivity statement saying that they believed in all this stuff in order to get their lawyer's license. And she stopped that movement and got a whole new slate of directors onto the, so she's just great. She's a fabulous lawyer, and she would be happy to come and speak to you about that case, the ins and outs of it, what it means, and to educate you on the Human Rights Code and how it can be used to other parents. And I could see that there could be what do they call it? A group, when it's a whole bunch of people get together, lawsuit,
Class action.
Yes, thank you. If you would associate yourselves and align with and give comfort to and, give space to and be welcoming to parents who are frustrated and who do need support, you would attract the attention of conservative writers and journalists who might give you the time of day because you're working for a cause that they believe in. And those are some of the ideas I had. Oh, and pro-family, of course, you know, you are pro-family. And in this respect, you know, families, this is a family issue. It's a family issue. Some of those stories that I just heard, things are happening to children. Their parents find out. Their parents are having to stand up for them in schools. There has to be a strategy. You have to be able to talk to teachers and to principals, and you have to have the arguments and the right words and the right tactics and the right communication skills to be able to be effective when you're dealing with, because what they'll tell you is, oh, no, we're not about filling children's minds with theories. We're about preventing bullying in the classroom. And I'm sure you wouldn't want a child who's gender confused to feel left out or to feel, you know, that they're not included. And, you know, it's very hard to answer that on the spur of the moment, unless you're kind of prepared with the right arguments. And to be able to say, oh, I think bullying is terrible. But, you know, if a child is confused about their gender, isn't that something they should be talking first to their parents about, not to teachers? Wouldn't you advise a child who's, you know, having problems to go home and talk to their parents first, or invite their parents to come in and discuss it with you? I don't want to get too specific. I think the general rule is to be one step ahead with your own words. It's that's how they get you, is they steal the words. They compel you to say the pronouns. When you're compelled to say the pronouns, and you know, Canadians, they want to be nice, right? Well, what's the difference if I say she or he or they? Well, you know, I'm just being nice. No, you're not being nice. When you agree to say the pronouns, you are agreeing that the ideology has weight, that there's something to it. And you have to be able to say, I'm not going to use those pronouns because I feel uncomfortable using them. You know, you have to be, I have to have a line for every aggressive thrust. There has to be a prepared counter thrust. You can't always be set back on your heels. You can't be in a defensive posture. I would say, you know, offense, obviously, but not obnoxious offense. The correct offense. I'm not in the business of, you know, counseling strategies. I just know how I would wish to feel if my child were in the position of this. If my kid came home and said she was all upset and she should go to the doctor to find out if she's a real girl because of something her teacher said, I know I'd want to go in and take that teacher's head off, you know. So I would really have to make sure that I didn't show aggression myself or hostility, because that's the kiss of death. You know, that's what's used against you. I was very impressed with the Buffonies, because as upset as they were, they never once lost their dignity. They never once gave the other lawyer any suggestion that they are, you know, that they're uptight, or that they dislike, you know, that they're homophobic or transphobic or anything like that. They were very clear. They happen to be very, you know, have pretty liberal ideas, but they're within the spectrum of what we would call conservative, in the sense of in the best kind of way. They're not progressive. I don't want to ramble on and on and on. I'm sure.
Thank you, Barbara. This is Derek Sloan, leader of the.
Oh, hi, Derek. So nice to meet you.
Yes, good to see you. And I just wanted to thank you on behalf of our party for coming today. And I've enjoyed reading your stuff for many years. And for the benefit of our party, I just wanted to mention, when I started to become vocal about some of these issues in the leadership race for the Conservative Party, I was surprised at how much support I was getting from unusual sectors of society. And there's a lot of groups of people out there that you wouldn't think would traditionally be, you know, conservative or whatever you want to call what we are. But, you know, when I, for example, committed to repealing Bill C-16, there was multiple women's groups across the country that reached out to me and supported me. I've met the Buffones personally at a meeting. And as you said, they used to be, basically they're small L liberals. They used to vote liberal. They're not, the stereotypical, uptight religious right type person that the gender mystics like to think that we all are. So there's definitely, this issue is one that can help to grow our audience and help us to reach out to different areas. And I appreciate your comments on that. And I know in my own circumstance, I have 2 girls and a boy, 8, 7, and almost 6, girl, boy, girl. And, it's funny to watch from a very young age. They certainly know the difference between boys and girls. And just to leave them alone and let them kind of flourish in that latency period is just, it's a really natural thing. You don't have to do anything. You just leave them alone. And it's just great to see, how their individuality flourishes and how they grow. And it's great to have your support and others in the editorial sphere and in the writing sphere to be behind that. So thank you so much for coming today. And we hope to have you with us again, potentially personally in the future. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Very lovely to be here with you. And good luck. Good luck.
Thanks, Barbara. One more round of applause for Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
All right, Barbara. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you.
Okay. See you soon, I hope.